So I want to spend just a moment talking about the observations that we have made from reading The Bridge and The Night of Oranges. And so the first thing is that good description appeals to the senses using specific details. Think back to The Bridge, the cooing. We heard that when he described that sitting out in that nighttime, midnight atmosphere that was surreal. An appeal to one of the five senses is what we call imagery. So if you're appealing to the sense of sight, that's a visual imagery. If you're appealing to the sense of sound, that's auditory imagery. To the sense of feel, that's tactile imagery. To the sense of taste, that's gustatory. And to the sense of smell, that's olfactory. So anytime you're using descriptive language that appeals to one of the five senses, that is an example of imagery. We've also noticed in these two essays that an effective technique in narrative writing is to use the present tense to narrate past events. So in The Night of Oranges, we go back to that idea. It was written in 95 about an event that happened in 89, 6 years previous, yet he writes about it in the first person to stress the immediacy of the action, and it puts the audience directly into the action. Narrative writing typically uses first person point of view, and those pronouns would be I, me, my, mine, we, us, our, and ours. So it's going to be a first person narrative in most cases. Good writers rely on subtle organization. We talked about the idea that it's very elementary to say first, next, and finally, but a very subtly crafted organizational strategy will link key ideas together. So remember in The Bridge, where it began discussing the bridge, and then it got a little more close to the author about talking about his friends, and then a place of ownership and a place of empowerment. So you move from the general to the specific, a place of distance to a place of proximity. That was very careful and subtle organization. It's organized. You can't rearrange it and have the same effect. So that's the litmus test to determine if it's actually organized. And so that's the kind of subtle organization we're looking for, a deliberate ordering of ideas. And if you were to rearrange them, it just wouldn't build to the same point. Essay should have a thesis statement. Yes, we agree with that. And in the traditional 5-paragraph essay, they're usually the last sentence of the first paragraph. We're not writing a 5-paragraph essay for this assignment. The thesis in those essays is generally explicit, directly stated. We're looking for an implicit, so this is the preferred method, an implicit or implied thesis. They don't always appear in the first paragraph. In fact, if it's implied, it appears nowhere in the essay. You can't put your finger on a sentence and say, aha, there it is. Instead, it builds to an overall statement that you take away. That's called an implicit thesis statement. Good writers control syntax. That was the discussion we had this week about sentence length and variety, sentence starters or types of sentences. Do you have a combination of simple, compound, complex sentences? Do you have a variety of sentence openers, like opening with a prepositional phrase, opening with a subordinate clause? Do you have short sentences, long sentences, and medium length sentences? And remember at the end of The Night of Oranges, there were those 3 staccato short sentences so that you really slow the pace down. They were my oranges. They were proud of me, so that you really control the pace of the narrative. So control the syntax. Not every essay is 5 paragraphs. In fact, it can be a variety of long and short paragraphs, and that's something I want you to experiment with in essay 1. If you've never written an essay with a 1-sentence paragraph, this may be your opportunity to do so, but only do so for effect. Only do so when it's appropriate. Sometimes introductions can be longer than 1 paragraph. We saw in The Night of Oranges that the first 3 paragraphs you could reasonably argue constitute the introduction in establishing those journalistic questions of who, what, where, when, why, and how. And then finally, we saw in The Bridge the effective use of sentence fragments. Remember that Jason Holland used in his essay some subject fragments. They were missing predicates, and it emphasized the actual thing, the noun that we were looking at. They can be used intentionally and effectively to achieve a desired effect. Now, there's a caveat here. If you just accidentally have a run-on or a fragment in your paper and it doesn't contribute to some intended effect, then that's an editing mistake. You've missed that in the editing process. I'm talking about a deliberate choice to emphasize a point or a specific thing, like emphasizing the noun or emphasizing the verb by using a subject or predicate fragment. That's done intentionally for an effect can be really good. In fact, all good writers are going to use sentence fragments from time to time to achieve their intended effect. So that's it. That's what you should have gotten this week. So if you look at that list and you say, yep, I remember that, I remember that, I remember that, you have achieved the learning targets this week. This is what I want you to take away from reading the 2 model essays. Now, you know what's coming next. I want you to take what you've learned from the models and put it into practice in your own essay. So you also have in the materials section today a list of topics for you. And I know some of you have been asking me, well, what are we writing about? What's the topic? Well, here you go. Here are the writing topics for you for this assignment. So let's walk through them. Number 1, you can write a narrative about an event that changed your opinion about a product, a music group. That shouldn't have a comma between it. A person, place, or political candidate. Now, if there's something that's not on that list, but it's about an event and you want to write about it, you certainly can do that. You're not locked in terribly to just a product, a music group, a person, place, or political candidate. I've used these essay prompts before, and I can remember one of the best essays I read that was a narrative was about a young man's opinion changing about a group. And this has been several years ago. You may not even remember the Dixie Chicks. And they got into a little bit of trouble because they criticized then President Bush. And they're from Texas. He's from Texas. There was a big brouhaha that came out over it. And the student wrote a very insightful essay about his initial reaction. And then finally, after examining the evidence, what his final conclusion was. So what may seem like just such an insignificant event in your life or in the world could be the focus of a really good narrative essay. 2, you can write a narrative explaining a conflict. All narratives typically have some sort of conflict of person or conflict against someone else. For example, parent, child, brother, sister, boss, worker, human, animal, human nature. Or again, if there's not a conflict listed there, if you just want to write about a conflict in general, then you could write a good narrative about a conflict. Write a narrative about a crucial decision that you made. Again, it doesn't have to be these decisions, but at some sort of crossroads in your life where you had to make a decision to go one way or the other, and write a narrative about that. A narrative about confronting prejudice. Perhaps it was based on gender, age, race, ethnic background, or looks. I kind of like this very last one. Is the idea of, do you judge a book by its cover? Maybe there was a time in your life where you saw a situation or you met someone, they looked a certain way or it appeared a certain way. You had one sort of preconceived notion about it, and then turns out it was completely wrong. Your initial reaction was bogus. And what led you to draw that conclusion? That could be a very good narrative. Or you could describe a person or place so that you convey a very specific point about the person's character or about the place. So if you're classifying, for example, the bridge, that would be an essay in response to prompt number 5. And if you're talking about, you could talk about the Night of Oranges as being an example of talking about conflict, a revolution, the eve of revolution. So you can see that these topics are broad enough that you can write about a variety of things, but fairly specific and pointed to get you to include description and narration. So those are your writing topics. You will pick one and develop an essay from it. The scoring criteria is like we looked at on the slide, the things that I wanted you to get from reading the 2 model essays. I'm going to look at your essay and score it based on the fact that you've used descriptive language that includes imagery, an appeal to one of the 5 senses or multiple senses. I'm going to look for present tense narration, and I'm going to show you an easy way to check for that after you begin writing and you begin editing your essay. Check to see that you're using strong verbs and that they are present tense verbs. So I will help you with that. First person point of view, again, we're going to check to make sure that you don't dip into the second person using you, and that you don't dip into the third person, he, she, it. Looking for subtle organization, you're going to have to tell me and justify why this paragraph becomes before this paragraph and why this paragraph is next. So think about, before you write, how am I going to organize this without saying first, next, and finally? I'm going to look for an implied thesis statement. In other words, I don't want a thesis statement at the end of the first paragraph. In fact, your introduction might be a multi-paragraph introduction. I want the thesis statement to be there, but I want it to be implied. So if I get to the end of your essay and I can't state the thesis in my own words, then you don't have an implied thesis statement. So that's a more challenging type of writing assignment than actually writing the explicit thesis statement. I want you to control syntax by having a variety of short, medium, and long sentences. And I want you to do that in an effort to control meaning and control cadence and rhythm. I want you to try to use at least one short paragraph for emphasis. In other words, this is not a 5-paragraph essay. In fact, you're going to write more than 5 paragraphs. And one of those paragraphs needs to be 2, 3 sentences. It could even be one sentence, but I want you to choose it deliberately where you place that. And if it's appropriate, you don't have to do this, but if it's appropriate, I want you to use a sentence fragment effectively. Again, I don't want it to be inadvertent and not for a purpose, but I want you to choose and be able to tell me why did you use the fragment there. To accomplish all of these things and to do it well, it's going to take you 700 words to get there. And it's going to take you, think about those essays we read that were 13 paragraphs. So shorter paragraphs, but it's going to take you 700 words to get there. For font and size, make sure that you are Times New Roman 12 point. And for line spacing, you want it to be double. You also want to check under format line spacing to make sure that you don't have any extra spaces before or after paragraph. So if it says that you do, then remove space before or space after paragraph. So it should be double space 12 point Times New Roman throughout. The very top line of your paper is going to be your name, and hit enter. So it is first and last name. The second line is going to be your professor's name, so Mr. Dodson. The third line is going to be the title of the course. This is English 111. And then the fourth line is going to be the date that the final draft is due. And so for us, that final due date is the 28th. You're going to do it in inverted order so that there's no need for a comma. So 28 August 2020, and then hit enter. Then you want to use the center align button up here at the top and center your title. Do not put your title in quotation marks. Do not make it bold. Do not make it 14 point. It's just the same as the rest of the essay. And then go back to left align. Then you will hit tab to indent. And that will be the rest of your essay. Remember, I've told you that you need to do a word count. And so you can do that here by going to tools and word count to see as you're approaching that 700. There's one other thing we need to do. We need to add page numbers in the header. So to do that, you go to insert, and we're going to go to page numbers. And we want those to be right justified. So right justification is shown here. So see the numbers, they show up in the right corner. So I'm going to click that. I'm quickly going to highlight it and change it to Times New Roman 12 point so that it matches. And then right in front of it, I'm going to type my last name. So whatever your last name is, space. Okay? So if Hunter were doing this, it would look like this. Now, then when you get to page 2, it automatically inserts a 2. And on page 3, it automatically inserts a page 3. If you were just to put your last name and 1 here, then it's going to put a 1 on page 2 and a 1 on page 3. So you've got to insert the page number first. So that was insert, page number, and the one that's right justification. Quickly, I want to take you out and show you where you can find everything MLA. So if you will search for Purdue, as in Purdue University, AL, Online Writing Lab. And I want MLA format. Choose MLA formatting. And this is going to tell me how to do the works cited and all that kind of stuff. But I may just want to see the paper itself. And there should be an example here of how to format just the paper. For paper format, it gives you the general guidelines here. And so you can see that's what that first page of an MLA paper should look like. So there's that header we put in, your name, professor's name, class name, date in inverted order, and the title. So this is not just Mr. Dodson's preference. This is what MLA wants for the first page of an MLA paper. And so anytime you need to look for that guideline, Purdue offers it free in their online writing lab. As always, if you have any questions, give me an email. I'll be glad to try to walk you through any problems that you're having. Once you have your final draft completed, it should look something like this. Noticed in this essay, there's a variety of paragraph lengths. There's also some dialogue in it since it is a narrative. If I do a word count, then I'm going to see that this is well over the 700 word count that we expect for each essay in English 111. So in order to submit this week's assignment, if you've done this in Google Docs, as I have shown you, because I assume most of you are using Google Docs, you can also use Microsoft Word. But if you're using Google Docs, you can download this. You could download it as a PDF document, or you could download it as a Microsoft Word document, or if you've already done it in Microsoft Word, you should be able to upload the file. So just download the file. It should put it in your downloads folder on your computer. You see here that it's downloading it. Then in Moodle, I want you to submit this for Essay 1, and there's going to be a place where you can upload a submission there. So click Add Submission and upload the file. You can do that a couple of different ways. You can drag and drop that file. So if you just want to show it in the folder, click on it, drop it over here, and it's going to add that, and then save the changes, and that's going to get it submitted. This is where I will go in and grade essay number 1. If you have any trouble with that, send me an email.